It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it is time for another first thoughts and initial impressions video where I give you my thoughts as well as possible stat lines and things like that for an upcoming character. As I said in yesterday's video, today we're going to be covering the size I Opie elf girl known as Arya, who was just shown this morning. I will give you all of my 2 cents and things like that after we watch her intro. If you like these style of videos, please leave me a like or a subscribe. Helps the channel out here a ton. So now let's jump into her really sick looking S3, or I guess in this case, spoiler alert, S2 animation.
I do not regret any choice I made for the sake of my kind. I'll let you know what sets me apart. I'll be with you. The power of the shadows.
Alright, so Arya is going to be an ice mage. She is voiced in the English dub of Epic 7 by Susie Young, who I have had the pleasure of actually meeting in real life. She is a wonderful, wonderful person. You may not recognize her name, but you most certainly will recognize her most famous character, who is Yuffie Kisaragi from Final Fantasy VII. Moving on to looking at Arya's stats, she is an ice mage of the Taurus zodiac symbol, which means she shares a stat line with Dizzy, Sage Balancezon, and Solitaria of the Snow. Looking at her attack, she has 1,039, 5,299 health, 115 speed, 673 defense, 35% critical hit chance, but that is deceptive because it applies her S2 passive. Her base is actually 15%. She has 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, 18% effectiveness, and 18% effect resistance. Imprint release is defense for the entire team, which is very, very good. And we'll talk more about why that is when you look at her S3 skill later on. And her imprint concentration is defense percentage, which is very, very good because, spoiler alert, this is a defense scaling hero. You're going to care a lot about defense on this super, super thick woman. So yeah, not the highest attack. Health is actually good for a mage. It's not amazing. 5,299 is actually a really terrible health stat, but mages in general just have the lowest health amongst all of the classes. So anything over 5k is kind of a win when it comes to a mage. 115 speed is actually very, very good. If you've watched any of my videos, 114 or better is usually where I like my characters to actually end up being, because it gives me the option to play them as either a slow character or a fast character, depending on the kit or the meta game. So gives her more flexibility and more usage. 673 defense is pretty high, but again, this is a mage. Mages usually have in the mid to high 600s for defensive stats. Obviously, standard crit hit chance and crit damage. The interesting part here is the effectiveness and the effect resistance. This enables the character to go a couple of different ways. If you've ever built Dizzy before from the Guilty Gear collab, you know that the character could go very high in damage with something like a rage set, although it's going to rely on the rage set damage bonus because the base attack is very low for this actual stat line. Like 1,039 is not good, but that's one way you could go. You can go a damage dealing route. You can go a debuffer route because you have the starting effectiveness helping you out. But more importantly, and the one that I'm going to try and focus on for the most of this video, is an effect resistance bruiser build, because I really think when you look at the kit, it's going to become apparent that Arya is not going to really be a viable option in PvP unless you decide to build her as a high resistance bruiser. So now let's move and talk about the kit. First up, her S2 passive, Guide of Darkness. It increases her critical hit chance by 20 to 30% depending on Malagora. So that's why you saw the 35% in the stats window. As the caster's health decreases, critical hit damage increases up to a maximum of 50%. We will have to see how this works. In the past, traditionally, heroes like Bloodblade Karin, or Bloodblade Karin, I should say, will end up getting it at 25% breakpoints. So she might start out at, say, like 25 or 20% critical hit damage at full health, and then get like 30 at 75, 40 at 50%, and then the last 50% at 25% health remaining. Again, that's something that we're going to need to see. We are going to need to see a lot of numbers on this character when it comes to data mines, and we'll probably get that after the patch that is, I believe, scheduled for tonight. After using a skill, when her focus is full, she will also consume all focus to activate Dark Shadow Phantom. That is the huge cinematic attack that you see in the trailer, and I'll put it up here on the screen for you all to admire and watch again. Dark Shadow Phantom is an AoE attack that dispels 2 buffs and decreases the combat readiness of all enemies by 30%, and the damage dealt on this move increases proportional to Arya's defense. So again, we're going to need to see the multipliers because she has about 1,000 attack, so she's never really going to have great attack damage anyway based off of her attack score, unless like she just has insane attack multipliers. I think it was very smart of Smoggy and Super Creative to make this character a defense scaling hero, because traditionally it's very difficult to get a lot of the stats that this character needs. Getting an extra 30% critical hit chance for free means that this character is going to be easier to gear for newer players, and it means that you don't need to invest super heavily on specific things like attack or like crit damage, crit chance. Like, you just have more room to actually work with the character. I think this character is going to need to have a lot of bulk and, again, a lot of effect resistance. And again, hopefully that will be apparent by the end of us talking about the skills. So let's move on to the S3 here, which is the Umbral Hour. You acquire 3 focus upon using it. You acquire 3 souls upon using it, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Malagora. Using the power of shadows increases Arya's defense and makes her adopt a counterattacking stance for 2 turns. It also grants stealth and a barrier to all allies except for Arya herself. Barrier strength increases proportional to the caster's defense. So basically, you are going to get a defense buff and a counterattacking stance similar to Senya when you use this S3. But the defense also kind of doubles as an attack buff because this character scales off of defense for her damage. And then you're going to stealth and barrier everybody else. So it's kind of like a reverse para. It forces your opponent to just be funneled into Arya so that she can get a bunch of free counters. And the defense helps her survive, kind of like Belly in S3. Like, it's kind of like we're provoking everybody into us. We want everybody to come into us, and we have this defense buff to mitigate the damage. And then you're going to be obviously countering because you have the counterattack stance. So you're going to build a bunch of focus and hopefully be able to retaliate with that big S2 AoE attack as a result. That's kind of her play pattern. You go in, you S3, you kind of chillax and force them to come at Arya. And since all of your allies are stealthed, the only way for them to not single target into Arya is obviously to AoE, but because they're stealth, they have reduced damage. Stealth reduces damage dealt from AoE attacks, and if it cannot break the barrier, you will not break stealth. So again, it forces them to have very specific things to combat this character. You have to have like hard-hitting AoE attacks, or the ability to strip buffs from the enemy team, or the ability to set up unbuffable so that Arya can't really get the ball rolling. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for the character. And I'll talk about that in between S1 and her artifact. But overall, like on its own, Umbral Hour seems like a really strong S3 in general, just because of the amount of power and team compositions you can build around it. Now we'll talk about her skill 1, Shadow Call. You acquire 1 focus upon use, obviously 1 soul. It attacks 2 enemies with shadows with a 40 to 50% chance to decrease hit chance for 1 turn, depending on the Malagoras. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max defense. So essentially you're getting like a different version of Mercedes S1 whenever you use, or whenever you counter. Instead of getting combat readiness, you're getting a blind. I probably would have rather have had the combat readiness. Of course, it has the defense scaling. Again, need to see the numbers on all of her skills for defense scaling to get an idea of literally how much defense we're going to end up needing on this character. Soul Burn is an extra turn at the cost of 20 souls. If you've watched any of my videos, these are usually broken. Like, I just think that the extra turn mechanic is just kind of ridiculous. This character in particular has a pretty potent setup, especially if you decide to go book on her. I think there are better options than book. But you can go book at the start, Soul Burn, S1, Shadow Call to potentially blind, and then immediately go into her Umbral S3, and that will force them to basically go into her, but she already has 4 focus stacks, and the first person that hits her, she's going to counter and hit like an absolute truck. So I can see that being an option for the character. But again, it should be pretty apparent at this point what the play pattern for the character is going to end up being. You're going to essentially just build her as tanky as you can get her, kind of like, you know, your Dilibets, your Lionheart Sermias, and just kind of have her have a ton of defense and as much health and bulk as we can actually get. Have her throw up her S3 and kind of chill behind counter and then just spam S1 and spam S2. It's a really cool design hero. And if it's not already apparent, like, I'm not super gung-ho about the character. I really like the character. I want the character to be good. But I feel like when I do a lot of these reviews, I feel like I'm off the mark. And a lot of times I feel like I'm a little bit more optimistic than most about characters. So I've been kind of down on my initial thoughts, and impressions and things like that. Like, maybe I have it wrong some of the time. But this is a character where if she executes her game plan, she's just going to be absolutely nuts. She's going to feel so good to play and so, like, such a difficult puzzle for your opponent to solve. My issue is that there are a lot of characters in the meta right now that stop what this character is trying to do. This character is trying to stealth its teammates and become like a support tank slash bruiser that's just, you know, chilling, protecting her teammates. Like, she kind of functions like an Aria's holder, like Peyra, right? You just want her to chillax and counter everything and accrue value in that way. But the problem is that only works if she's allowed to get her buffs up and started. And two characters that are really commonly played that will deny that are Peyra, because Peyra is going to obviously go very, very fast and give you unbuffable. And the other is Angel of Light Angelica. So those two completely turn off what this character is trying to do entirely. Additionally, you have other characters like Rimuru Tempest, who is one of the most commonly played characters at all skill ratings. Just a very popular character. He completely dunks this character. So, like, anytime you try and set up your buffs, he's just going to cop them for his entire team. And it doesn't matter that you are a really, you know, thick, tanky character with your high defense. He doesn't care about you being a thick individual. He literally has true damage. He will just one-shot you through no matter how much bulk she really, really has. Like, unless you can get her to like 17k HP, which is about where Sage Ball and Cezanne usually ends up if you try and go really, really tanky. He's somewhere around like 17, 18k. Rimurus can still hit through that and kill you in one hit. So I just don't see how she survives there. She's a focus-based hero. Solitary of the Snow completely shuts the character off. The character is entirely counter-reliant, which means Rowana counterpick kind of dunks you. Lionheart Sermia might dunk you. It's possible. It depends on how much damage or how, you know, thick the barriers are that she provides for her team. Obviously, it's going to get reduced, but Sermia is a defense pen move. Then you have characters like Bellion. If you're just going to sit in stealth, she can just strip it. There are other things like Archdemon Shadow, where she sits on either Violin or on Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, and that removes buffs from the rest of the team. So they're not going to be able to sit in stealth. She's going to turn off your passive, so you're not going to get any S2 spam. So, like, there's a lot of commonly played heroes that make it really, really difficult for Arya to execute her game plan, which is why I think that the character might fall really, really flat. She does have some really, like, sick things you can do with her. Like, if you stealth, like, a Troublemaker Crozet with her, or, like, a Jacko, something that, like, or, you know, a hyper DPS of some sort. Those are really sick plays, and enable some really powerful strategies. So, like, Arya just feels like this character that's going to be incredibly boom or bust overall. Like, this character is either going to be a force in the meta, you're going to see her, she's going to be really popular and successful, or she's going to feel like Mort, where it just, the character doesn't really have a place or do anything because everything that is played just stops it from trying to do what it's trying to do. So those are my thoughts on the character. Let's talk about the artifact, which is Scroll of Shadows. If the caster attacks when it's not their turn, damage dealt increases by 8 to 16% depending on the artifact's level. I believe it is 12% at plus 15. And after attacking, has a 50% chance to inflict a random debuff on the target for one turn. The random debuffs are decreased defense, decreased speed, silence, or unbuffable. At first, I thought this was like a really good artifact, But then I realized, like, this is not the best damage increasing artifact you could be playing, right? And at the end of the day, even though it has some really good debuffs here, it doesn't really feel like it's much better than Sira Rin at the end of the day. I think there are better artifacts you could be playing to set up or execute Arya's game plan. Obviously, Tehagel's Ancient Book exists, and it can do that setup like we talked about. You soul burn the S1 at the start, and then use her S3 to start with 4 focus, and then you'll get a huge counterattack right off the rip. That's fine. That's the floor for where I think you'd want to play her. I think Red Tenebria's artifact might be something that is very interesting to experiment with because it gives extra dual attack chance, which could lead to some surprise AoE S2s. That is something of note. And then there is also Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, which I think Fairy Tale for a Nightmare is going to end up being the absolute best option on the character because one of the ways to actually combat all of the pitfalls of the character is to build her with really high effect resistance. It is possible, in the past, we have seen it with Dizzy. Counter Dizzy on resist set, going 4-piece counter, 2-piece resist, was a very real thing. You could get a Dizzy with, not a lot of effectiveness, but you didn't care because you were still hitting the DPS because they didn't have effect resistance anyway. But you could have like 150, 170 ER on your Dizzy and be fine with it. You would just, dodge all of the debuffs on your opponent's team, and your Dizzy would just kind of sit there as like a brick wall that was just countering with stuns, throwing out S3s, and you couldn't really deter her from doing that. And we've seen that with characters like Sage Ball and Cezanne as well, who has the same stat line. We have seen these like 200 plus ER Sage Balls that are just there to get the DPS with his low effectiveness, because he doesn't really need a ton of effectiveness to hit the carries, right? So he's just there to control the carries, be bulky and obnoxious, and you can't really silence him, you can't stun him or any of that stuff. So he's just going to do his job. I think that is the route that you want to be playing Arya. You want to be playing her on something like counter resist or like 6-piece resist, or even depending on the multipliers, lifesteal resist seems like a good option. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? If you can resist like a Para S2, this character's value gets a lot higher. If you can resist like a Briar Witch Asaria S2, the value is a lot higher. I don't think you'll ever really resist an Angel of Light Angelica because those are literally just tank stats plus effectiveness. That feels unrealistic. I feel like you'll just lose too much value. But a lot of these other characters that have like minor strips or minor unbuffables that are trying to shut you down, that's a great thing to have happen here. Like even like a Conqueror Lilius won't be able to like lower the cooldowns or the turns on your counterattacking stance if she gets far enough into the fight where she can use her S3 again. So yeah, resist just feels like the play because it stops most of the pitfalls of the character. The question is, do we have enough stats left in the tank for defense, health, crit damage, crit chance? Do we have enough of that? Is that available to us that we can still make a competent damage dealer? Like, I can foresee this character being like a 150 base crit damage character with like 85 effectiveness, like how we all built Archdemon Shadow, and how to play Archdemon Shadow. I can see that build working here, where we're like 150 effect res, 85 crit chance after our passive is applied, no crit damage, and just relying on the crit damage that comes for free, and then just as much defense and health as we can get. Just go straight up full tank on this character and just try to weather the storm and whittle people down with a torrent of counterattacks. Again, that doesn't get rid of every bad matchup. You're still going to always proc Rowana. You're always going to proc Lionheart Shadow. You're still going to die to Rimuru no matter what you do. So, yeah, that's pretty much what my thoughts are in a nutshell on this thicker than a Snicker girl. I want to be wrong. I want this character to actually thrive because it's a really cool character. It's completely different than a lot of the other designs we've seen. I like that they're taking risks and making new archetypes, like new kind of characters. Like the last time, I don't think we've ever really had like a mage that does what she does, and that's what's really exciting about it. But again, power creep is real. I am trying to be somewhat real in these reviews and my thoughts on them. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or you disagree. If there's something I forgot, as always, you can let me know. And that's going to be it for the video. Enjoy the rest of your day. the rest of your week, and hopefully you will all join me on Friday for something fun that I have cooked up for you all. Until then, later.